So my name is Ivan Pehar. Thank you, Justin, for the intro. The only people that call me Ivan are my parents, and now Justin as well. So I'm excited to share with you our 6th annual VOD Evolution study. We see this report really as a bellwether for how Canadian streamers are consuming content, any friction they have with content, how much time they're spending, and ultimately, how big is the addressable audience. So I don't have enough time to go through the entire study, but I will go through 3 of the key highlights from this year's report. And then again, you can find the full report here on the QR code. I'll flash it up later today as well. So let's start with a big statement. And many of you have probably seen this. It was an eMarketer study earlier this year, and the headline was, by 2029, more media dollars will be spent on connected TV than on traditional linear. And it's a big statement. And there's a lot of factors that go into this. But I think what's really important is if we dig into this and look at the total TV ecosystem. And we heard the broadcasters earlier before the break talk about, they're looking at how do they play on both sides of the fence here, both on traditional as well as on the connected TV side. And I think what's important to note here is that, well, this is good news for all of us. Yes, there's opportunities for growth for each and every one of us here, but I think fundamentally understanding what users want to consume is really at the core of that. So, hearing Matt talk about Canadian content and content is extremely important. And Barb talked about having the grid and being able to just sit down. So I'm going to touch on some of those points here in our presentation today. So 3 key themes that I want you to understand. Streamers, so Canadian streamers stream more than just AVOD content. We'll dig into what is that content. This might go against everything we talk about or think about, but streamers actually don't mind seeing ads. And we'll dig into that as well. And then finally here, there's friction that happens with streaming. We all know what it is. I'll share a few examples that I think we've all gone through. But I think it's important to understand that these are 3 of just the biggest trends that we're seeing happening this year. So the first one, streamers stream linear, not just AVOD or on-demand content. And let's look at streamers overall. What do we know about them? Well, almost half of them don't have cable. 35% of them never had cable. But that's not the key point here. The point here is that 43% of Canadian streamers are watching broadcast content. But what has changed? Well, it's no longer that coax cable that's coming into your house, but rather they're streaming that content. I don't need a cable subscription to watch sports content. I can download the app and pay the broadcaster. And I think that's a fundamental shift that's happened. And we heard the panel talk about that just before the break. Barb, who sat right here, said, well, people just love sitting down. And we saw that in the research. They like sitting down, going to the grid, and actually watching the content they want. Now, if we take this one step further and thinking about fast channels or fast content, which is primarily broadcast content, and we look at how many users are leaning into that content, right? Over 50% are watching traditional linear as well as linear content through fast channels. They're making the active choice. And with that choice comes opportunity. And what is the opportunity that we see users leaning in? Over a third say, we like those thematic content channels, CTV Laughs, Shark Tank, where they can just sit down and know exactly what they're going to watch the minute they turn to that channel. We then look at what percentage of time and how are they accessing. And I mentioned this earlier, is that 80% of the time spent watching broadcast content is happening through streaming. where just under 20% is happening through traditional, dare I say, cable box that some of us have. But I think fundamentally it's important to understand they're still watching the content. It's the delivery mechanism that has changed with how we're consuming that content. Next trend. We hear a lot about ad avoidance. I don't want ads. I'm paying a subscription so I don't see ads, which might have been the case a few years ago. But what we see here now is that almost 90% of Canadian streamers are addressable through in-stream video. 9 out of 10 Canadians who are streaming are addressable through in-stream video. And we've seen this growth exponentially over the last few years based on opportunities to consume even more content. So understanding that they're addressable, the next point is, well, how do we find out what they're watching or what tiers are they on? And when we look at 3 of the primary methods that users are watching ad-supported content, we see healthy growth across all 3 buckets, right? It's the adage of rising tides. So we have all this content available. What does it result in? Well, ultimately, it results in more consumption. And here's one stat I'll leave you with as well, is that the average streamer will spend 10 hours a week watching ad-supported content. Although 10 doesn't seem like a lot, it represents 43% of total time that users are spending watching content. And that increase was here last year would have been 7 hours. So as we see the opportunity with more content and more opportunities, resulting in more time spent, more ad load, all of the downstream effects as a result. I'm going to pause here for a second. I'm going to ask you to picture yourself sitting at home. You got your remote. You sit down and think of this. As you sit there, you have the world's library of video content in the palm of your remote. Okay, you have more choice than ever sitting there in that small remote. Well, what happens when you have choice? You also have friction. And what is that friction? So, how many of us have experienced this before? When we ask users, on average, how long does it take you to find something to watch? And users have said, well, on average, it's about 12 minutes. Seems long. What if we take that and say, well, on the higher end, what is the average amount of time you've ever spent trying to find content? And I was floored when I saw this. 31 minutes to try and find something to watch. Yet we sit there with the library of content on our remote. Now, for some of you that maybe fall into this cohort, 35 and under, they quoted almost 46 minutes. 46 minutes. Or one full episode of Love Island to try and find something to watch. It's a great show, by the way. So we understand there's friction. Now, what do users care about? Well, half of them said, I never know where to find the content. It's always moving from one place to another. Do I have that subscription? Do I not have that subscription? When is it leaving? And then this point, I think, really hit home, where they said, like 7 in 10, I don't care who makes it. I don't care who produced it. I just want to be able to find something I want to watch. So what does this create? Well, it creates an opportunity. And an opportunity for brands to help guide those users down that path. And here's an example of McDonald's last holiday season, who understood this friction point and basically sponsored Roku Rewind to help users find content and not spend 12 or 30 minutes trying to find something to watch. And then what happens? Users say, hey, you, brand, help make my journey a lot easier. And almost 7 in 10 users said, it was extremely helpful. This ad helped me find content I wanted to watch. Now, as we get close to closing here, a couple other examples where how do you bring value to a user? And this is no longer a passive experience, but when we think about a 15 or 30-second spot that drives engagement, right? Asking users to lean in something, interact with this experience, right? Almost 7 in 10 said, we find that valuable. You're giving me something of value. And then if you're even younger, almost 8 in 10 said, I really found that ad and that experience extremely valuable. Sarah, I see you sitting at the front. You're going to talk a lot about this afternoon. And I think what's really important, right, is we talk about the essence of being Canadian, a Canadian brand, and the importance of that. And as we asked users across the entire funnel, they all agreed and said, yes, it's important. We need to celebrate our heritage. We need to celebrate who we are and the brands that we represent. So I only have a minute here. There was an announcement that was made earlier this summer at Cannes, and it was a partnership between Roku and Amazon. And at that moment, right, that partnership was announced as a US first. And I raised my hand and said, well, how about Canada? We generally hear this response, you'll be a fast follow in 2026. Well, that doesn't help me this year. I'm delighted to say that this partnership will be launching in Canada in the next few weeks in parallel with the launch in the US. So what does that mean? As I stand here today, this single partnership will allow users and everyone in this room to be able to access 88% of all streaming households in Canada. This is a unique integration that is done at an operating system level and allowing you to use your Amazon DSP to leverage both your Amazon audiences, manage frequency, manage everything you want to do across those 88% of all Canadian streaming households to make your campaigns supercharged, but also to be able to access the 90% of streamers in Canada that are addressable through ads. So as I close, last chance to download the white paper right here. I guess the 3 takeaways. Streamers watch more than just on-demand content. They're watching linear content. Streamers are open to seeing ads as long as they're helpful. And then last, understanding users are open to supporting and watching on ad-supported content. So thank you for your time. Keep streaming and have a great rest of the day. Thank you.